Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 376 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where we're getting deep into the details of the appendices to The Lord of the Rings. But for now, it's time to take a break from our studies for some live Q&A.
Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm James Tauber, the Sage of the South, and I'm here with the Man of the West, Alan Sisto.
Folks, join us as we welcome a few of our patrons to join us for our 31st quarterly Questions After Nightfall. We've been running these a long time.
No matter how you got here, you're all welcome here in the common room. Here at the Prancing Pony Podcast, we're reading and talking our way through Middle-earth, with plenty of speculation and bad jokes along the way.
Especially tonight, with tonight's panel, let me just tell you that. We do love our deep dives into the lore, discussing our favorite themes and a whole lot more. But once a quarter, we take a break from our read-through and welcome a few of our patrons to join us here in the common room and bring along some of their very best questions.
Now, we have no idea what they're going to ask us, so as we've done so many times before, we're simply going to do the best job we can in answering their questions with whatever we have on our shelves and in our all-too-limited brains.
Thankfully, I've got a whole lot of ebooks going on. All right, well, as with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, aside from edits for things like nervous coughs or time spent flipping through pages while we look for an answer, we are going to be presenting this as it was recorded live. Everything you hear in the show will have been recorded during this session. We're not going to go in and give a great answer and record it later. As tempting as that is.
As tempting as it is, exactly.
Tempt me, Frodo.
If you'd like to be on one of these sometime, join the Fellowship of the Podcast at patreon.com/prancingponypod. Mm-hmm. Questions After Nightfall episodes are recorded once a quarter, and patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium tier and higher are invited to join.
It's just one of the ways we show our appreciation to those who support the show, giving them the opportunity to join us, visit with us, make us laugh, make us think, and more than often, embarrass us in the best possible way. Let's go ahead and get started. James, who is up first?
Okay, up first we have Marilyn.
Marilyn, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Good evening, everybody. So I'm starting you off with a speculative question, just to kind of ease into it for tonight. Other than the heartbreakingly beautiful sentence, Finrod walks with Finarfin, his father, beneath the trees in Eldamar, we hear little else of the experiences of the Noldor, who returned to Valinor either through bodily death or through forsaking the march of Feanor after hearing the prophecy of the North. What do you suppose it was like for those who returned? Were the penitent Noldor shunned by the Teleri? Did they spend time with Nienna? I welcome your thoughts.
That is a really good question. You're right. We don't get any strong indication of what happens with those who returned or with those who stayed. But of course, it's the Vanyar are just OMG Manwë all the time. So, for them, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But what about the others, James? What about the ones who returned? And what about the experience of those who go back, get a new body? Because, of course, the ones that go back to the Halls of Mandos for a period of time. So after they get their new Hroa, they can have a choice. Some of them, like Glorfindel, pop back over to Middle-earth. Others stay there in Valinor. So what are your thoughts?
I can't imagine it would be entirely comfortable interacting with the other elves. As you said, the Teleri, the Vanyar, whatever, they're like...
Yeah, the Vanyar, they're locked in, man.
Exactly. But I can imagine there would be some awkward conversations.
Yeah.
With the Teleri especially.
That's the thing. I kind of... My hope is that just as Olwe tried to say to Feanor, it's a friend's job to tell a friend when they're an idiot. I would like to think that there's a little bit of I'm glad you recognize you're an idiot, but welcome back. Like a little bit of ribbing, and then you're still our brothers. Except for the ones that were actually involved in the kinslaying or
there's being an idiot and there's killing a family member. Right?
That's the thing. I don't think if I was involved, I'm putting myself now in the shoes of a Feanorian who was all about the kinslaying at Alqualunde, and I took the ships and I didn't take the ships because those aren't the ones that turned back. Right. But, if I was involved in the kinslaying and Mandos himself, says, come back, turn around or you're doomed. I feel like if I had been involved in kinslaying, I would have to double down. I'd have no choice. I don't know. I have a hard time imagining anybody who basically drunk the Kool-Aid that hard being convinced to change their minds. On the other hand, the ones that were not involved but had been, besotted as if with wine, sober up and say, yeah, you're right, and come back. And I think those, as long as they weren't involved in the kinslaying, I think they're all right.
Yeah.
How does that differ, though, from the ones that die? And do we know if there's a process by which they get to choose to come back? I mean, Glorfindel certainly is an example of one who did. I don't know that we're shown explicitly other characters that do, but
is it really that much of a choice, or
is it? That's the thing. Yeah, is it a choice?
I don't know that you're typically given the choice. I think
Glorfindel was
compelling reasons.
Yeah, that's true. Glorfindel sort of earned it. So I guess the default then is to get the new body and then return to Valinor.
But whose idea was it? Was it Glorfindel's idea?
Oh, I don't know.
Was he persuaded to return?
Oh, in other words, was it for him? Was it like, hey, we could really use you out there, in Middle Earth, and maybe you should go back. Have you thought about going back? I don't know. That's a very good question.
Yeah, I don't know if we know the answer to that, but
I don't know that we do either. If it is, it would be buried pretty deep.
I imagine this is an issue with all sorts of traditions around the afterlife.
That's true.
Meeting people that you maybe didn't particularly get along with, or did some nasty
conversations in the Halls of Mandos are going to be just as awkward as the ones in Valinor itself, maybe more so.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the sort of awkward conversations of Elrond showing up and telling Celebrian Arwen's not coming.
Yeah,
and that sort of thing, right? There's those sorts of.
That's not the conversation. Poor Elrond is not looking forward to that. Marilyn, you've got something to say on this.
Well, I'm just wondering what you all think about the role that Nienna might play.
That's actually a really good question, because when I was thinking about sort of the broader traditions around the afterlife and so on, and I sort of wondered about this sort of coming to be in a place where you can forgive, where you can accept people that wronged you. And I would imagine Nienna would be part of any of that sort of process if it happens certainly amongst the elves. So that actually may turn out to be a really important part of a
very important part. I wonder what part Olorin might have played before Third Age 1000, let's say. What role he might have played in sort of helping to reconcile folks. Yeah, I have a feeling that to get the Glorfindel answer, we'd have to, it's probably a little too deep for today, but we'll look into the Glorfindel writings, the last writings in the Peoples of Middle-earth. There's a couple of Glorfindel essays that are in there. I mean, I'm looking here just to kind of give you all a little snippet from this. Glorfindel remained in the Blessed Realm, no doubt at first by his own choice. Gondolin was destroyed, all his kin had perished, and were still in the halls of waiting, unapproachable by the living. But his long sojourn during the last years of the First Age, and at least far into the Second, no doubt was also in accord with the wishes and designs of Manwë. When did he return? This must probably have occurred before the end of the Second Age and the change of the world, after which no living embodied creature, humane or of lesser kinds, could return from the Blessed Realm, which had been removed from the circles of the world. So that certainly, anybody who would have gone there after the Undying Lands had been removed from the circles of the world wouldn't have a choice. They would be stuck.
Yeah, anyone who died in the Third Age.
Well, Arthur in the chat says, except for embodied wizards, of course. The Istarí are a class of exception all of their own. That's a fun question to think about, though. The idea that these folks are going to maybe have some.
Well, they have meteors for sending the Istarí back.
Oh, no. The Rings of Power reference. I was waiting for that. I was hoping it wouldn't show up. Nicely played. That's only in the Second Age. When they actually show up canonically, they show up on a boat in the Grey Havens because Círdan gives them a ring. Yeah. All right. Thank you, James. All right. Who is up next?
Okay. Next we have Marie.
Marie, welcome back.
Hello. Okay. So I have it's not a speculative legendarium question. It's more of a, what would you like to have seen? So what one or two things from History of Middle Earth would you have liked to have been included in the Sill and or the Lord of the Rings?
Can I also have them finished at the same time? I would have liked the Tale of Tal Elmar to be finished and included in the Silmarillion. That's found in the Peoples of Middle-earth near the very end. And it's a fascinating story, such a unique perspective. For those who've never read it, just the 30-second version is it's written from the perspective of a young man who is descended clearly from both native inhabitants of the region and a Númenorian, and then a Númenorian who is captured as a slave, to be clear. And then his awe when he sees the Númenorians return and the fact that he can understand their language a little bit, that for him was just a language of dreams. It's a great story, and it really reveals a lot about Tolkien's own perspectives on things, and certainly highlights the criticism that we have of the Imperial Númenor.
That's a great choice. I'm going to go a little different, not necessarily a story, but a character. And this kind of sets up for the next episode of... Or will it be an episode we've already recorded?
It's the episode we will have already recorded, I believe.
Okay, so people listening to this would have already heard it. But it is the character of Pengalov.
Yes.
Pengalov, who was such a major part of so many of the stories that we get in the history of Middle-earth, completely written out, even in the Silmarillion. He's not mentioned, not only in Lord of the Rings, he's not mentioned in the Silmarillion either, even though... he was such a major part of the Annals of Beleriand, and really he's the major source of all of the material that we have in the Silmarillion, at least at some point.
I mean, he's the frame narrative of the Silmarillion if he'd been included.
At some point. And I wonder if Christopher does talk about his regret in not giving the Silmarillion a frame narrative.
Yeah.
And he talks about, the whole line that Sam gives about wanting to know more about what Gimli's talking about, and suggesting that maybe it would have been fun to give that third age perspective on the Silmarillion. But I would have loved to have seen more about Pengalov as the framing story and exactly what he told.
I really like that. Marie?
So just to be clear, for my part, I wish that Christopher had included the actual poetic oath of Feanor in the text of the Silmarillion as opposed to the prose version. I mean, it's just so powerful.
Yeah. Every opportunity I have when I teach history of Middle-earth, if I'm quote even the smallest part of like the flight of the Noldoli or something, I read those lines, because especially the alliterative verse from Feanor giving his, when he talks about the ring, my jewels. Yeah,
that's tough. I mean, because my immediate thoughts were all these other things, but the question that Marie asked was, what was it in history of Middle-earth? Which is why you went with with Pengalov and I with what I went with. But man, I just keep thinking I really wanted to see more about Gondolin, or I really wanted, in Unfinished Tales, I want to hear the alliterative verse that Eorl spoke. We're not given that verse. We're not told what he said. We're just told that he spoke in the form that they had previously, basically they were known to speak this way. So he's talking clearly about alliterative Old English verse. I got just please, any more? I would love to read that. Yeah. That was a great question, Marie. And I think we have one more before we get to the break.
Yes. Andrea.
Hi. Thanks for having me on here.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
I have a question that, like most of you, I have read the book several times, and I get hung up on one particular passage in The Two Towers. Every time I read it, I feel like I just don't understand it. And when you and Sean did an episode on it a few years ago, I thought, okay, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to understand it. And I still didn't understand it after you did an episode on it. So I don't know if I am just misreading it, but I'd like to kind of hear your input on how I get confused. So this is in the Council of Elrond. Well, actually, that's in the Fellowship, but they're talking about something else. Gandalf is recalling his incident with Saruman, and Saruman says, "For I am Saruman the Wise, Saruman Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors." Then Gandalf notices, when the robe moves, what appeared to be white actually is woven of many colors. So what is going on there? Did he try to make rings? Did he actually make rings? And if so, do we know anything about them? What is the reference to the colors? Like he was the white, Gandalf was gray. What is the many colors? What is that implying? I just don't understand that part.
James, I'm going to let you start with this, and then I'll see what I can come up with. I mean, I feel like I've got something at the tip of my tongue. But
yeah, I don't know if I have anything to say about the many colors. Certainly the ring maker makes me think, of course, of the comment about the lesser rings being mere essays in the craft kind
exactly.
of thing.
That's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, we know that a lot of more rings were made than the 20. So presumably that continued in some way, and maybe that's part of Saruman's particular interest in ring lore, was that he had that continued interest in what the craft was.
Yeah. I mean, he made a ring. It doesn't mean it had any significant power. It doesn't mean it compares to the 3 or even the 7 or the 9. Certainly can't compete with the 1.
But why say it? I mean, it's still an interesting question. Why?
Well, he'd been studying the craft of the enemy, right? I mean, that was the whole thing. And so he was probably making, attempts at making a ring of power. Nothing like the One Ring. But
I wonder if that was in some respects almost an insult to call someone a ring maker, knowing that they had not achieved the sort of thing that the Gwathi Myrdain were able to.
Yeah, but he referred to it himself. So we do have a number of hands up. So we're going to let Arthur say something here. What do you have, sir?
Well, it occurs to me that it is quite possible that no one has attempted to make any kind of rings other than perhaps engagement rings since the fall of Eregion. And this is Saruman's way of saying, hey, it's been 4,000 years. Look how great I am. I made a ring.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, certainly we don't have any evidence to suggest that more rings have been made since the capture of Eregion. Because, of course, to do so would be, to invite the Sauron to come try to take it from you.
It may have been a major issue. No one would have wanted to make a ring, and this is Saruman asserting his independence.
That's fair enough as well. All right, Jim, you've got something to add on this. Again, sticking with the ringmaker part, we'll talk about the many colors in just a bit.
It occurred to me that in one of the forewords that Tolkien himself wrote when somebody was accusing Lord of the Rings as being an allegory of modern times, they said, if we had followed up that allegory, then Saruman would have gone into the wreck of Mordor and used their information to make his own ring, and then he would have contested with whichever of the lords of the West had decided to wield the One Ring. So that implies that even in Tolkien's mind, Saruman had some skill at ring making, and he might possibly be learned up in the lore to just fill in a few secret plans from the wreck of Barad-dûr to make his own ring. So he was studying the crafts of it, and even Tolkien seems to think that he might have been making progress.
Which actually makes me think he may have been talking about future plans, not necessarily past as well.
Well, but he did have a ring, because at the council earlier, Gandalf says, I rode to the foot of Orthanc and came to the stair of Saruman, and there he met me and led me up to his high chamber. He wore a ring on his finger. So I'm reading that as Gandalf laying the groundwork for Saruman's then subsequent claim to say ringmaker.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Now, how much power that ring has, we don't know. Marilyn?
Yeah, I tend to incline with Arthur that at this stage he might have been thinking about elven rings and kind of working his way up to the grand finale, but I think the overarching plan for him was to try and find the One Ring.
Oh, yeah. That's
because he'd been searching the Glanduin and all that sort of thing.
And we know that he had found the chain, right?
Yes.
Because that we later read in Unfinished Tales of the Disaster of the Gladden Fields, when Aragorn returns to Isengard, to Orthanc, he finds a little casket and a lockbox, basically, in a wall safe in Orthanc, that, and in there is the chain that had once held the ring. It leads to some uncomfortable questions about what he might have done with Isildur's bones, which is a whole other story. But clearly Saruman had found at least that much. And perhaps if he was doing anything with a ring that would have any power, the ring's power would be metal detection.
Interesting. Use a ring to find a ring.
All right, well, now that we've kind of batted around the idea about the ringmaker, let's talk about the colors thing, James. I feel like that's a little more subtle in some ways, and I want to get to what I think is subtle about it, but then there's the obvious part, which is Saruman is done being the white. He's done being the pure. He's done being the leader of the council. He's done with his limited role. He is saying, he is making a claim, I am all of these. I am everything.
Right. I was thinking he no longer wants to stay in his lane.
He's openly, he hasn't wanted to stay in his lane for a while, but now he's openly rejecting that lane.
But now he's saying, I want to spread out. And
the irony of which means now there's a vacancy for Saruman the White.
Right.
So now the white could be assumed by Gandalf, but I think that's the obvious sort of on its face answer. But I'm always put in mind of that line from Mythopoeia: "The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise, and still recalls him. Though now long estranged, man is not wholly lost, nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship once he owned. His world dominion by creative act, not his to worship the great artifact. Man, sub-creator, the refracted light through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues, and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind." Not that I am going to give you the most brilliant analysis of that verse, but the idea of white turning into many colors, and the whole thing about, he who breaks a thing to find out what's in it. And, this, all of that brings me back to this phrase every time. And I can't help but think that Tolkien had this in mind, this idea of, what white is made of.
Right. And so I'm just wondering, though, because in that context, it's a positive thing, right? It's not...
I know, that's the thing. I was like,
and so I'm wondering if that's actually helpful in the Saruman case. Yeah. Is it that Saruman is not recognizing that he was always that? There's a sense in which he hasn't. He's being too blunt and literal, and not realizing that it was always there. That multifacetedness was always there. He didn't need to break up. He always had all colors.
He always had
That's
that.
why he didn't need to be refracted.
I also sort of wonder, it's this idea of worshiping the great artifact makes me think of just how obsessed Saruman is with the One Ring. And instead of understanding his role, even as a sub creator, so to speak, he's trying to go beyond that and take more than his share, more than what he has a right to take. But I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. So I think it can go, the multicolor thing, I can go two ways. It can either be he wanted something that it was not his right, or he failed to recognize something that was already true and sought after it.
Yeah, exactly. Marilyn?
Yeah, the thought that occurred to me first was the multicolors can represent his notion that he can now dominate all the colors, so that he can partake of, Radagast the brown and Gandalf the gray, all those things together, and incorporate them, that sort of both and-ish sort of thing, which usually is a good thing in my eyes. But in this case, essentially, I think saying, I got all what you guys have. And
I don't need you anymore.
I'm going to show it. Right. I don't need you. Forget this purity thing. If that's what it was, I think it was more of a color grade scheme that implied, white is the best, which
the leadership
kind of gets up my nose somewhat, but for different reasons. Just saying, I'm the leader, but you're not following me. And so I'm just going to say, look, I've got all your guys' power anyway. I can make a ring. And I now possessed of all these different abilities.
Either way, it's another one of those great examples of Tolkien leaving us something that's great to discuss, great to think through. Might not have an absolutely solid answer, but is certainly generates great discussion. So, great question. Soon we'll get back to more questions, but before we do, we want to remind you there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony podcast than just us, and that's a good thing.
The PPP has an amazing listener community. They're always coming up with great questions and discussions across all our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
Now on Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast. You're going to follow the page to get the news and episode drops, but you're going to want to join the group to get involved in some great discussions, including with some of the folks that are on tonight's episode.
You'll definitely want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we're at Prancing Pony Pod. Conveniently enough, that's also how you'll find us on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Twitch. And if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/Prancing Pony Pod.
And if you want daily Tolkien content, check out Today's Tolkien Times on the PPP YouTube channel and on all your favorite podcast apps. That's my short format daily show with everything from Middle-earth Map Monday to First Stage Fridays. And then there's my new twice weekly streaming of all fun things Middle-earth on the PPP Plays. Be sure to check both of those out on the YouTube channel for all the PPP productions at youtube.com/@PrancingPonyPod. All right, James, Who's up next?
Next up, we have Jim.
Jim, welcome back, sir.
Hey, how you doing? Good to be back, and I've got to tell you, working at the Weather Service in these times, I feel kind of like Bill the Pony at the gates of Moria. A little uneasy there, but I did want to note that it was a really good thing that Bill wasn't a filly, because as a boy pony, he was able to make his escape from that dreadful place, but as they all say, the mare to Moria.
Oh, wow.
Pause for applause, groans, what have you.
Doom. Pure brilliance as always, Jim. Great stuff. All right, what question do you have?
More of a thought, I guess, is I'm very intrigued by the humor that Tolkien is able to imbue into Lord of the Rings and obviously The Hobbit. And in fact, I think one of the big lacks in the Silmarillion is the lack of that humorous viewpoint. That's one of the reasons why it's a little bit drier and harder to get through. My favorite comedic moment in all of Lord of the Rings is actually steeped in great loss and tragedy, which is when Merry is coming to himself in the Houses of Healing, and he asks Strider for some tobacco, and then Strider goes on this whole thing about, if you can't find your pack, you must talk to the herb master of this place. So such a funny, relieving moment in the otherwise often tragic aftermath of the great battle. So I was just wondering, has anybody ever done like a treatise or a book talking about specifically the humor of Tolkien, and what are your favorite humorous moments in the whole legendarium?
Actually, there is a book. I have not yet read it because I have such a long to read list. The book is called Laughter in Middle-earth, Humor in and Around the Works of J.R.R. Tolkien, edited by Thomas Honegger and Maureen Mann. It's got Tom Shippey wrote the foreword. I have only read amazing things about it, and I'm looking forward to reading it, but it is still on my to-read list because my to-read list is terrifyingly long. Lots of great examples, though, of my favorite funny moments. James, I'm gonna if I start, I'm gonna go and like run 3 or 4 of them, and I might take yours.
Go.
So I'm gonna
no. You go, because I'm looking up to get the exact wording of mine. So
okay,
you go.
And that's the thing. A lot of times the wording is very precise. One of my favorites didn't make it into the most recent. And by most recent, I mean the 1960 whatever, when Tolkien did the second edition of the Lord of the Rings. In the first edition of the Lord of the Rings, Gimli is questioning Aragorn's wisdom as to, why he looked in the Palantir. And I don't have the exact quote because I don't have the first edition handy in front of me, but he basically says, "What did you tell Sauron?" Aragorn's answer is that I have a rebel of a dwarf that I would trade for a perfectly serviceable orc. What do you think I said? And I just love that because it's Aragorn having the sort of short temper of Gandalf and letting sort of the Gandalf rub off on him. And he's just had enough of Gimli. And I love that because once again, it's Tolkien is funny. He is really, really funny. And even when we see stuff in the Silmarillion, it's not as on its face funny. Like you said, it does make it a little drier. It's more historical, more mythological rather than a personal story. But sometimes you get the really dry humor in there. I'm thinking of Cyros and some of the moments there in the story of Turin. A lot of black humor in that tale as well. But there are so many other moments that come to mind. I still want to give James his. Okay.
Well, so one example of sort of that really dark humor is, of course, Beren.
Oh, goodness,
raising his hand and saying, "Even now, it's in my hand."
It's in my hand, dude. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
I love that.
But the other one I was thinking of, which is probably not conventional humor, but I was reminded of it because of the whole tobacco thing.
Yeah,
and it's when it's in the Houses of Healing where the Herbmaster enters and says, and it's just the fact that the Herbmaster is showing off his linguistic ability because he says, "Your lordship asked for Kingsfoil, as the rustics name it," he said, "or Athalas in the noble tongue, or those of you who know somewhat of the Valinorian," right? He's going through all the different names for it. And Aragorn cuts him off before he can say the Valinor name. He goes, "I do so."
Yeah.
And I care not whether you now say Asea Aranion or Kingsfoil, so long as you have some.
Right? Exactly. And once again, Aragorn cuts him off.
Not only cuts him off, shows that he knows exactly what he's talking about. He goes, "I know it's Asea Aranion."
Yeah.
But I don't care if you call it that or Kingsfoil, just as long as you've got some.
Yeah. Shut your mouth already, man. That whole section is filled with some great humor with Gandalf telling Yorith to run as fast as your tongue and go get your... Woo, man. Good stuff. Arthur.
Yes. Well, first of all, that particular section with the healing master, along with the master namer in The Wizard of Earthsea, always reminded me of one of my anatomy professors in medical school who just drone on and on about this is connected to this is connected to this. But I was thinking, one of the ones that always makes me laugh and smile, even though it's not overtly funny, when they were in the house of Tom Bombadil and Goldberry.
Wow, Melkor.
Well,
your
that's
conspiracy theory is leaking through, Arthur.
This is another discussion. But when she looks at Frodo and says, "I can tell you're an elf friend. The light in your eye and the ring in your voice tell me."
Not the ring in your pocket, the ring in your voice. Yes. All right. There's so many good examples. I mean, the Hobbits are great, right? I mean, their sense of humor and their ability to maintain it, even in the face of just absurd circumstances. I think of Sam coming up with funny things to say in Mordor, and he does. And it's just another example of that Hobbit resiliency. It's really great.
The other thing I was just going to say just about humor in general is I love the fact that in the handful of interviews that we have of Tolkien himself, he can so immediately transform from being serious and almost angry to being the most jovial, lighthearted person, just in an instant, like within a sentence. And I think that really comes out in the writing as well. And one example I can think of is when he's talking about not particularly being keen on other people. When he says about forming cults and having people speaking Elvish to one another.
Oh yeah.
And he looks quite angry when he's saying, "No, I don't desire to go and have afternoons talking Elvish to chaps." And then he immediately says, "For one thing, of course, Elvish is too complicated." And his eyes light up and he's got this big grin on his face. "I've never finished making it." And it's that sort of thing he does all the time in these interviews where he goes from serious, almost angry, as I said, to just...
Certainly a get off my lawn sort of grumpy professor.
Right. And then immediately switching to a beaming smile and making fun of himself.
Joy and laughter. And
exactly. Yeah.
I love that about him. And it does. You're right. That's so... clearly shows through in the texts, especially The Lord of the Rings. Yes, also in The Hobbit's a little different just because the tone. And so I feel like the humor there, it's funny. I mean, things like "thank you very much" and all of that. It's a little more on the nose and it's a little less.
Say what you did there?
Yeah, I do. Thank you for catching that. It's one of those things where sometimes he even telegraphs the jokes ahead of time with The Hobbit. Right. Whereas with The Lord of the Rings, a lot of times they hit you out of nowhere and you're completely stunned because it is a time, like Jim mentioned in the question, here we're dealing with the tragic aftermath of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields and Aragorn's pranking Merry about his tobacco. It's great.
Right.
And it's very Tolkien. And honestly, I feel like a lot of that may also be a reflection of his experience in World War I.
Right. Exactly.
When you're fighting for your life, but you've got to find that humor.
It's a coping mechanism. Yeah.
It's very much that camaraderie and brotherhood in the fighting and in the stress as well. Arthur, you said something else to add on that real quick.
Yes, not that I'm obsessed with humor and Tolkien or anything, but it always struck me one of the very last jokes in The Lord of the Rings kind of sums up the whole spirit of hobbits. It was purely a Hobbiton joke to refer to it as Sharky's End.
Sharky's End. That's such a great Hobbit joke. I love it. Yeah, that is fantastic. Great stuff and a great question, Jim. Thank you for that, because that's just going to give all of us a wonderful opportunity to sort through all those moments, and everybody who listens is going to have their own favorite moment too. So Thanks for that one. James, who do we have up next?
Okay, next we have Chris.
Chris, welcome, sir.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
It's going well. It's our pleasure to have you.
I was considering whether I should start with a pun, but you have me following Jim, which is like trying to follow Shadowfax at a full sprint. I get
Good luck with that. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll refrain and I'll just ask my question. You've spoken about the Dagor Dagorath a few times on the podcast, and I know that's not entirely canon, but and we don't look at the bones, but it's relatively reminiscent of the Book of Revelation, and I'm sure that for Tolkien as a Catholic, that was pretty relevant. My question for you is, in the version of events where the Dagor Dagorath happens, do you think that humans that have died get to be reunited with the elves? And specifically, do you think Arwen gets to see her family again?
Ooh. Oh, I'm not going to like my answers to this question. It is a good question, Chris. I mean, the Dagor Dagorath is a non-canonical thing because it didn't even get published in the Silmarillion. And for those who aren't familiar with the idea, the concept, the Dagor Dagorath, it's a name. It's a Sindarin name, simply means the battle of all battles. And it's the last battle. It's the end of things, the apocalypse. This is the thing, if you've ever heard about Turin showing up and killing Morgoth, this is when it's supposedly going to happen. But there were different versions of the story, different versions of the end, some of which, may be more, like you said, Chris, at least touched by the idea of Revelation, but probably more so by the idea of Ragnarok and some of the other myths and legends across the world. But I think it's fairly clear that with men, they literally, after they die, they may have a little bus stop at the Halls of Mandos, and then they catch the next ship out of the world. I don't think they come back, which means that sadly Arwen would not get to be reunited with her family. I think they're all gone. The only question is what happens to the elves after that, because their life is the life of Arda. So what happens when Arda is destroyed and then remade? That I don't know. James, do you have any thoughts? Certainly on the question as asked, but then also anything on the Dagor Dagorath.
I mean, not really. This is one of the things that on some of these questions we're explicitly told no one knows. Right?
That's true. You're right.
Yeah. Of all the things that we're told, this we don't know. I really, really do not know.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There were so many different changes in it. And I'm looking at some of a compilation of the various changes. After Christopher Tolkien goes through the various versions, the ones that are in the earliest Silmarillion, the Quenta Noldorinwa, the Annals of Aman, the later Quenta Silmarillion, and they're all slightly different. And the one later in the later Quenta, which was written in 1958, does have some interesting changes. Obviously, Turin comes back from the dead, strives with Morgoth, and
which is fascinating in itself. Yeah,
that's pretty amazing. The fact that it's Turin, because he is a man, but on his right hand is Eonwe, and on his left it's Tulkas that was going to strive with Morgoth. Turin was on the left, Eonwe was on the right, and it was the Black Sword of Turin that would deal Morgoth's death blow. And then Feanor was going to break his Silmarils and rekindle the two trees. The great light would come forth, the mountains would be leveled, and the light would go all around the world. So there are all sorts of really cool ideas in here, but it's clear that this second prophecy of Mandos, which is also what it's known, is sort of kind of incompatible with a lot of what else we do have in canon. And there was a note about the end of the world that Tolkien wrote that I believe was in the Athrabeth. The elves expected the end of Arda to be catastrophic. The end of Arda is not, of course, the same thing as the end of Ea. And for those who are trying to remember the differences, Arda is the earth, the globe, the planet. Ea is existence, the universe. About this, they held that nothing could be known except that Ea was ultimately finite. It is noteworthy that the elves had no myths or legends dealing with the end of the world. The myth that appears at the end of the Silmarillion is of Númenórean origin, clearly made by men, though men acquainted with elvish tradition. So that end of the world story is a mannish story, according to that. But that's the thing. It's so many various,
when's that's in the Athrabeth, did you say?
That's in the Athrabeth. So that would have been, when did he write that?
Well, so
late 50s, right?
Yeah. So at that stage, this is part of the theory of why Pengalov gets written out. It is that Tolkien. Well, one theory is that he had decided that all of the stories were of mannish origin.
Yeah, which is why Pengalov got written out. You're right.
Well, that's one possibility. Yeah.
All right. Well, we do have a couple of folks who want to pipe in here. I know I've got some more things I want to think through on this, but Marilyn, what do you have?
Well, it just occurs to me that it might be that the elves would be admitted to the halls of humans after the death of Ea. Oh,
after the death of Ea rather than the death of Arda.
Yeah, because, Arda goes, the elves go is sort of the general thought, I think.
Yeah.
That we have, but that doesn't say anything about the perpetuity of humans.
No, it does not.
It's quite possible, perhaps, that that's one solution.
That is indeed. Arthur, you've got something.
Yeah, and I have to admit I am not as versed in some of the scriptural references as perhaps others are, but when I read several of the versions of this story, what I saw was that the Silmarils got broken and new light came up and it went around the world, but the world was still there. I didn't necessarily read it as the world being destroyed, so it's still Ea, it's still Arda. Arda's got better lighting now.
Right.
But it's still the world, and that way it doesn't. There's not, and the elves are still stuck there.
Right. Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, that's if this is not the remaking of Arda, then we're good there. I'm trying to remember some other things. Jim, you've got something to say.
Just that the dwarves believe that they're going to help Aule to rebuild the world after the last battle. So there is something afterwards.
Mm-hmm. There will be something to do after to help Aule with the reconstruction efforts, I suppose.
It'll take them that long to gather all the mithril to rebuild the gates of Minas Tirith.
James, I'm remembering one other quote. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick. It's because I just came across it recently when I was talking about languages.
Mm-hmm.
And it was specifically about Mannish tongues. Mm-hmm. There is a piece in The Peoples of Middle-earth, and it's an article that even I struggle trying to work my way through. It's The Problem of Ross, right?
Okay. Yep.
So you know what I'm talking about. But there's a line in there that says that the language of the folk of Haleth was not used, for they had perished and would not rise again, nor would their tongue be heard again, unless the prophecy of Andreth, the wise woman, should prove true, that Turin in the last battle should return from the dead, and before he left the circles of the world forever, should challenge the great dragon of Morgoth and Calagon the Black and deal him the death stroke. So who's he going to kill? He's going to kill somebody.
Right.
And then Calagon apparently, so it's, again, Tolkien still wrestling with all of these ideas. Yeah. But I remembered that because of the language bit. And that the only way we're going to hear that language spoken again is if Turin comes back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting to hear that that's what he would speak. But yeah.
Yep.
All right. Great question. A really insightful one, or one that generates a lot of insight and discussion. Thank you, Chris. James, who do we have up next?
Next up, we have Sam.
Sam, welcome, and thanks for your patience.
Oh, no, happy to be here. In the beginning of the Silmarillions, when they're talking about the creation of the universe through the Ainur, we learn some of the things that were sung into existence, Manwë the air, Omo the water, etc. But really all we hear is about the Valar. What do you think the Maiar sung into existence? Keeping in mind that in the Eyes of Ilúvatar, some were related, and that Gandalf calls Radagast his cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that. You're right. Oh, that's a good question.
It's complicated because the division didn't exist in the early versions.
No.
The Maiar came much later.
Not the characters that we know as Maiar, but the idea that they were Maiar, that they were a different branch.
That there were two levels of the Ainur.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always imagined, as a composer who's worked through thinking through how this would work musically, I've often imagined that the Maiar that were associated with the particular Valar would have just been involved in some component of whatever they were responsible for. So in other words, even though Ulmo might have been overall responsible for water, that there would have been numerous aspects to that.
Yeah. And
that the Maiar could have potentially been involved in sort of, not carving out, that's the wrong metaphor, but singing into existence certain aspects of the water in Arda.
Sort of as the Vala would be doing the grand plans and the overall scheme of whatever area of creation they're going to be taking charge of. They're Maiar people, because that's how the Maiar work, is they're all people of a particular Vala.
Yeah,
and they
exactly.
would just work as like almost their assistants or their project managers
Yeah, exactly. Well, like an architect might, give a junior architect the job of, can you work out the electrical plans, or can you work out, this particular aspect of the building? Yeah, that's sort of how I've always envisaged it. I don't have any textual evidence for that.
No, but that makes sense. I mean, given what they are, right? I mean, when we read about the Maiar, that is to say, once the Maiar are a thing, and those characters who we now know as Maiar are identified as such, in the Silmarillion, the published version, we read that they are, with the Valar came other spirits whose being also began before the world. So they're certainly of the same order as the Valar, but of less degree. They are the people of the Valar. They're servants and helpers. So of course, they're servants and helpers. They're going to do the tasks assigned to them by their Vala leaders, if you will. The thing is, we just don't know much about them, right? I mean, even the Silmarillion is very vague, saying their numbers not known to the elves. Few have names. The Maiar have seldom appeared in form visible to elves and men. Right. So, it's, I guess, another example of how the boss always gets the credit. So, exactly. But that would make the most sense to me. And I don't, like you said, I don't think there's any specific textual evidence of that. I mean, even the other Valar, many of the other Valar weren't necessarily creators. You think about, what did Nienna make? Right. What did Irmo make? He makes dreams, if you want to say that. But, that's not a construction like Aule made the mountains and Ulmo made the seas and Manwe makes the winds and Varda makes the stars.
I mean, the Ainur are all inclusive, right? There are no Valar or Maiar that are not Ainur.
Correct.
So they were all involved in some way in singing into existence. They may not have had obviously recognizable items to create, elements to create.
I wonder how much of their creation, though, came into play maybe after the singing and in the actual construction of.
Well, that's another big thing that shifted between versions of the Ainur, right? How did the music directly create it, or was it just a vision that then they had to actually act on to?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, certainly
Tolkien changed his mind.
The Finnish text suggests that it's a thing they now have to make a reality of. And in that case, then you can pretty much rest assured that each of the Valar are going to be giving their tasks to some of their people, to some of the Maiar.
Yeah,
I wish there was a clearer answer to that, Sam. It's a really good question. I suppose we could come up with one or two things that are like headcanon. What cool thing would Eonwë have made, for instance?
Right.
But yeah, I don't think we really have any answers to provide. Other than just the general idea that they would have followed their respective Valar. I mean, it's even the same for the bad guys. I mean, the Valar Raukar and the Maiar that followed Melkor and did their bidding as well. Good question, though. Very good question. Thank you. James, who do we have up next?
Next up, we have Arthur.
Wait, we have Jim and Arthur in the same episode. The pun world is going to explode. Arthur.
And allow me to say, thanks for letting me back this time.
You're welcome.
I've saved up a few since last time.
I don't doubt you.
My first question, and it may touch on a certain TV show, although not directly. We read in The Rings of Power and the Third Age that at the Battle of the Morannon, all things were divided, all creatures. And the dwarves fought for Sauron, although not the House of
Durin.
Not the House of Durin. And I usually look at that and think, okay, they're talking about how a lot of people fought for the bad guys. But I've always wondered, and I don't know if it'll appear in a season finale of a certain TV show, whether we would see orcs, trolls, and maybe the odd dragon or Balrog fighting on the side of Gil-galad and Elendil, because all peoples and all things were divided. Doesn't that mean that some of the bad guys were fighting for the good guys?
That's certainly the implication of the text in my reading.
Let me take a look at the actual text. Hold on one second. Talking about the army, the last alliance, from Imladris they crossed the misty mountains by many passes and marched down the river Anduin, and so came at last upon the host of Sauron on Dagorlad, the battle plain, which lies before the gate of the Black Land. All living things were divided in that day, and some of every kind, even of beasts and birds, were found in either host, save the elves only. They alone were undivided and followed Gil-galad. Of the dwarves, few fought upon either side, but the kindred of Durin of Moria fought against Sauron. The only thing that would give me pause on that, to say, yes, Arthur, I think you're right, is the example. Some of every kind, even of except it's even of beasts and birds.
Even of beasts and birds. Yeah, exactly.
That suggests it's more than beasts and birds. I think you're right, Arthur. I think we have to...
That's my reading of it.
I think we have to suspect that a few orcs, a couple of trolls. I don't know about the dragons, because I tend to think they wouldn't have fought at all. Just kind of like the dwarves, like, we're not showing up, we're not interested. I can see the dragons being like, what's in it for me? I don't, they're very independent.
Well, you brought up a certain TV show, and of course there was a scene in that where there were a bunch of orcs that were kind of, why are we even putting up with this?
Yeah.
So they already have touched on this idea of orcs that aren't happy with their lot in life.
All living things. They are living things. I mean, that's the thing. We can't, even if they're not... I was trying to see if I could find a reason to have an exception to this.
Well, that would be the only thing if you argued that the orcs were lesser in the chain of being even than birds and beasts. And I'm not sure.
Tolkien makes it pretty clear that they're not. I mean, they are a twisting of, not an independent creation of Melkor. Whether their origin is elves or men. I mean, because that was a thing that Tolkien never really settled on. So in that case, they're certainly living things. We know that Tolkien makes it very clear they reproduce like every other living thing. So they're alive. They're sentient beings. That's clear. They speak language. They have, say, culture, but their culture consists of graffiti on fallen statues. But, they have something. Yeah, the argument there is a pretty reasonable one, that the elves are the only species to be solely on one side.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Chris, you've got something to add to this.
I mean, on the topic of orcs, I think it calls to mind Shagrat and Gorbag and their conversation, right? Of, how do we get somewhere with no bosses, right? And I think to me that implies that, exactly, they are maybe terrified of Sauron to the point of following him, but they have desire to potentially do something different.
Exactly. Arthur.
And in fact, I was thinking about that when I was watching that certain TV show where we see that some of the bad guys are conflicted. And I had wondered whether, even though it's in this book and not in that book, they still have access, whether they had this in mind and whether they're building up to something interesting with some of these characters because of that line there.
Mm-hmm. Well, they would certainly be able to read this. They just can't quote it. They can't do something that's out of this without permission. But yeah, that would be an interesting idea. Can you imagine seeing a troll, fighting on the side of good? I don't know. But yeah, certainly a plain reading of the text you're right. And I can't believe I never thought about that. All living things, some of every kind.
It makes a point. Yeah, it makes a very, very explicit point to say the elves are the only. Well, first of all, it makes it clear that we're talking about everything, birds and beasts included.
Yeah.
And secondly, the elves were the only ones.
Yeah.
So for the avoidance of doubt, it's very clear here that every other category had people on both sides.
Some of every kind were found in either host. So Ents, Huorns, eagles? That's a terrifying thought. I can't imagine the eagles of Manwë that any of them would have fought on the other side. Maybe they just didn't fight, but...
Maybe not all eagles are of Manwë.
That's true. Yeah. Well, the giant eagles, right? The actual...
Right.
The big ones that are like 737 sized, yeah.
Yes.
All right. Ooh, that is a challenging question. As usual, Arthur, you ask something that makes me look at the text and go, wait a minute. Scratch my head. What does that say again? All right. Jim, you've got a follow-up on this?
Well, you're remarking about eagles fighting on the side of the bad guys just reminded me of a scene I saw out here in Eastern Shore of Maryland a little while ago. I saw a bunch of vultures, buzzards, who were feeding, and as I drove past, they scattered, and there was a bald eagle amongst them also feeding on whatever side of the road. So I was thinking, you're falling into bad company here, aren't you, Mr. Bald Eagle?
They could be. That's definitely, the bald eagle. Like, you're slumming it, man. What are you hanging out with these guys for? All right. That was a good question. James, I think we have one more here in the first round before we get to round two.
We certainly do. The one and only Neil.
Neil, welcome, sir.
Oh, no, it's great to hear all these questions. So my question is, with the exception of Éowyn and the Shield Maidens of the Rohirrim, Are there any female warriors in the Legendarium? And for completeness, this is females actually wielding weapons as opposed to, say, leading an army. For example, Gladriel leads an army to clear Dol Guldur during the War of the Ring, but did she personally fight?
Good question. I know there's some examples. I know that
First stage.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. First stage, Haleth and
right, that's what I'm thinking.
And her people definitely fought. So obviously, Haleth is the first one that comes to mind. I was also thinking, though, when you mentioned the Rohirrim, my mind went back to their predecessors, their ancestors, the Eotheod. Not necessarily that we have explicit examples of them fighting, but we are told that they have stories of the valiant men and women. And so it's valiant as opposed to some other trait. And that, to me, speaks to at least a few of them wielding weapons. But there was another example in the side of the bad guys, the ones that they were fighting during the slave rebellion. We learned that the women of those people, which was the, it wasn't the Easterlings. James, do you remember the name of the, I think it was the Balkoth, right?
Mm-hmm.
The women of those people also wielded weapons that they fought.
Yep.
And that specifically is given as an example. So we have at least the idea of the Eotheod. We have explicitly their foes in the Balkoth. We have explicitly the Rohirrim and Haleth and her people. Marie?
I believe it says that Baron's mother had a heart that would rather have stayed by her husband and fought rather than refugee to Brethil.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I do believe that's right. I can't recall the exact quote. I'd have to pull that up, but I'll try to find that actually while we're discussing the other aspects of the answer. Neil, you've got a follow up as well.
Certainly the elves in the first age, the Noldor, when they return over the Helcaraxe to Berryland.
Yes.
I can't recall any there, but I always wonder whether they were equally fighting against the forces of Morgoth. It's just not mentioned because of the way that the text was not written and published by the professor.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine they wouldn't have under the circumstances and the first battle of Beleriand in particular.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm almost sure we have other examples, but my mind is thinking that it's more like suggestions. Hints, clues. The idea that we have of the Eotheod, the strong and valiant people, men and women, right. Specifically mentioning both. So those are the ones that come to mind. It's a good question, though, and it's going to make me want to dig a little deeper. That might be something where I actually do go back at a later time and flesh that answer out. Not that I'm going to change what comes out in this recording, but it might be the kind of thing that I want to follow up on a postscript or something at some point. Certainly, Jim mentions in the chat Princess Idril at the Fall of Gondolin. Definitely is also fighting to protect her son and to escape. I'm trying to think of other examples. Are there any in the Scouring of the Shire? Are there any women hobbits that fight that are named as such? I don't believe so.
I don't think so.
No. And they do seem to have a tendency to sort of tell the women to go back to the house and hide. You think of Farmer Cotton telling Rosie, go back, get your mom and go, go back to the farmhouse. So I don't think we see that there. Now, you could say that Lobelia wields an umbrella, much like a woman would wield a weapon, and she is feisty as can be. And I would argue we have an example of a Hobbit woman wielding a weapon. It's just an umbrella. Yeah,
for sure.
It's a great question, though, Neil. Well, we're going to get to the second round of questions, at least a partial second round, in just a little bit. Folks, if you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the PPP by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. It's what gives me the ability to work on making this show better every year. And when you join, you get the best Discord community around. That includes live episode recordings, hangouts every month. You also get episode postscripts, ad-free episodes, free merch, and more.
You can also become part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and join the Fellowship of the Podcast.
And folks, you can always help us out by giving us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify. And please do recommend us to your friends. Well, James, we've got time for at least a partial second round. So, James, who leads off this second round?
Okay, next round starts with Arthur.
Arthur.
Yes. We know that Eonwë was described as the mightiest in arms of all in Arda. We know that at the battle at the end of the First Age, he took down Morgoth, although Morgoth was a little weakened at that point. But since he's the mightiest in all of Arda, it makes me wonder if there was a match, could he take Tulkas?
Well, that's the thing. It depends on the fight, right? Eonwë is the most skilled with weapons. He's the most skilled martial fighter, whereas Tulkas is the strongest and most skilled wrestler. So if you're telling me that you're going to give them each some sort of a weapon, I'm telling you right now, I'm putting my money on Eonwë. But if it's a bare hand brawl and grappling and stuff, I'm taking Tulkas every time.
Right. Tulkas has the grip strength.
Yeah. Tulkas is definitely the guy you don't want to get in the ring with. Eonwë is the guy you don't want to get on a battlefield with.
Right.
I mean, I'd actually frankly like to avoid both of them in either circumstance. But, I'm just a middle-aged softy, so I don't want any part of that. Yeah, but Eonwë is whose might in arms is surpassed by none in Arda. So you give him a sword, you give him a halberd, you give him a dagger. I don't care what you give him. Nobody's going to be able to match him. Mm-hmm. But Tulkas, on the other hand, can wrestle anybody to the ground. Good question, though. I like it because you're actually getting to talk about my favorite Vala and one of my favorite Maiar. So I think Tulkas gets a sort of a bad rap. I've always feel like people are like, my favorites, it's either Manwë or Ulmo 9 times out of 10, or maybe it's Vardada. But, I'm sorry. Tulkas is pretty dang impressive. The guy wrestles Morgoth, wraps a chain around him and drags him off to prison. I mean, and then when he still knows how to follow the rules, right? He's the guy who, when Morgoth's going by, he's got his fists clenched. He's like, well, let me at him. Yeah. Anyway, Arthur, what do you got?
Just a quick follow-up on that. We always hear that Tulkas is mighty, but you don't go to him for advice. No. And there's a stereotype about the big, strong, not super bright guy, and I don't really want to go there, but I wonder if that's what Tolkien was getting at.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was thinking of like particular rugby players that he'd had experience with when he came up with the idea of Tulkas. That wouldn't shock me at all. All right, James, who do we have up next in the second round?
Okay, next is Marie.
Marie.
All right, so
hello.
More thinking cap time. So sorry.
Oh, great stuff. I love it. No apologies. Please, I love this.
All right, so I know that you're going to dive real deep with Eldarion and Arendis with Sarah, yes. But I have a speculation question. One of the things that has always annoyed me about Arendis is that she gives up. She goes and pouts in the country. She could have been a queen regent of Numenor, with Eldarion running around doing, his sailing thing and running off to Middle Earth. She could have totally ruled Numenor in his name.
Oh, yeah.
And what do you think? I think it would have made for a more divided island, for sure. Ooh. But what do you think the effect of that would have been? Obviously, I think Tar al-Kalame would have been a better queen, for one thing. She would have had a better example.
Well, yeah, I mean, Tar al-Kalame, she was kind of doomed to be really, it's going to be a hard reign for her. I mean, growing up the way she grew up, in bitterness and anger and really being abandoned by one parent and then practically being abandoned by the other is heartbreaking, what she went through. You're right. Arendis essentially gave up. If she had stayed and been like the regent, ruling during his time away, during his journeys.
What could have changed though?
Yeah, that's the thing, because most of his voyages were during their betrothal.
But I mean, it wouldn't have changed his journeys.
No, it wouldn't have changed his journeys at all. And I'm trying to think, his longest journeys were all prior to the two of them getting married. All right, so they were married in 871. By then, he'd gone on all but 2 of his voyages.
Right.
So he was only going to be gone on 2 more. There's one when their daughter is young. He voyages on Hirolande. That trip goes from 877 to 882. That's the one when he brings back the letter for his dad. That's the really important one historically.
Yep.
And then actually he did go on several more now that I think about it. During the years that after he became king, he kept traveling from 883 off and on for the next century. So yeah, I don't know. It wouldn't have changed any of those. Would it have changed the way Numenor was ruled in his absence?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I don't know that many of the sort of changes that were happening in Numenor happened at that point.
No. I mean, it's not as though we were dealing with, the Kingsmen and the Faithful being separate factions at this point. They were all still, in theory, faithful.
Because this was still early on, right? We're only essentially a third of the way in.
We're before Second Age 1000 still. I mean, he passes away not like 9.
Well, a quarter of the way through. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're well early in the time period of Numenor. So there's no split there. The only thing I can see it doing would be helping Ancalame prepare more for her reign, and maybe in a way helping to tie together the island, the people of the island under the pair of them, as opposed to just, our king who's off on the boat again. But I don't know that would have made much difference because they weren't a very split kingdom yet. They were still very on the same page. I think the big help would have been Taran-Calame. Let's be honest. That's probably the only help, but that would have been significant because her reign was problematic and led to some other issues down the road. Yeah, that's such a tragic story. And I am planning on spending probably 10 or 12 episodes covering that with Sarah next season.
Okay, so I guess there's one possibility. Sorry, I'm just looking through all of the timelines to who was ruling when. The only thing I can think of is that, so we're told circa 1000, Sauron, alarmed by the growing power of the Númenóreans, chose Mordor as a land to make into a stronghold. And he begins the building of the Barad-dûr, right? That happens circa 1000 because he's worried about the growing power of the Númenóreans. Tar Eldarion was the ruler in circa 1000.
Yeah.
So the only thing I can think of is that had there been a different ruler at that time, maybe Sauron would not have been as alarmed by the growing power of the Númenóreans and built the Barad-dûr, which is actually a major thing, right? I mean, you could imagine a situation where, for whatever reason, whatever scared Sauron about what the Númenóreans were doing, if that had not happened, the implication is
it would have happened later, though, wouldn't it?
Well, this is the reason given for why he went to Mordor and built the Barad-dûr. It's the Númenóreans. It wasn't the elves.
No,
it was the Númenóreans that he still thought he could probably convince the elves with rings, right?
Yeah.
The Númenóreans were who he was always worried about.
Yeah. And for good reason.
But it's interesting that it was during Eldarion's rule that we were told he was alarmed by the growing power. So had things been different in such a way that Sauron was not alarmed by that growing power,
maybe
it could have actually turned out quite differently.
But how much of that would have been if Arendis hadn't given up and then she was sitting as regent during Eldarion's?
We don't know. I guess we don't know enough about what the growing power of the Númenóreans was.
Yeah.
They'd already been sending ships to the coast, although they had not started making permanent havens yet. That didn't happen until 1200.
That's correct.
So they're just making visits, and there's obviously exploitation going on at that point. It wasn't.
Well, they did try the harbor, right? Didn't he? He tried building a harbor and it got demolished a couple times.
Right. Yeah,
but that was
Londair. Yeah, the early versions of that. Yes, yeah,
Vignalonde. Yeah, and then you're right. Circa 1000. Yeah, since he didn't die until 1098, it was very much his reign and the establishment and expansion of Númenórean power that had Sauron running scared.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that would have been changed if Arendis had stayed.
No, strong. I'm not saying it was. I was just wondering what are the possible changes. Like, had there been a big change in Númenórean's foreign policy at that time, could have made a difference.
Yeah, it would have been interesting. Like maybe he builds something some other place.
Right.
Maybe he just decides, that's
not at all.
Guldur place.
Yeah, maybe.
Interesting. That's a good question, though. I mean, certainly there's going to be a lot of time spent on Arendis next season. All right, James, who's up next?
Okay, next up we have Andrea.
Andrea, what do you have for us in round 2?
Okay, I have what's hopefully going to be a short and sweet one. One of another spot in my annual rereads of The Lord of the Rings that I come across, and I always just kind of pause on it for a minute. And it's one of Tolkien's famous textual ruins that he just drops and like never looks back, never brings it up again. I feel stuck on it, like I just wish I knew more. And this is when Strider refers to the Forsaken Inn, which is a day's journey, I think, east of Bree. Like, first of all, that's terrible marketing. I mean, who calls their place of business the Forsaken Inn?
The Forsaken Inn.
Why would you call your place of business that? And who ran it? Is it still open? Who did it serve? Why did they put it there? I've just always been fascinated with thinking about this inn just out there, because it's another 2 weeks to Rivendell. So there's the Forsaken Inn and nothing. So what's up with that? What do y'all think about that?
I wonder if it's called the Forsaken Inn because by the time that Aragorn's talking about it, it is an abandoned building.
That's my assumption. Yeah.
You know, in fact, in the history of the Hobbit, and I'll have to get the actual text out, but I remember reading that Thorne and company found a deserted building where they camped, and it might have very well been that they'd camped near where the Forsaken Inn was. It was already forsaken even in 2941. But if not, my hunch is that it was already forsaken by 3019 for sure.
The way they have it capitalized in the text, as if, the Green Dragon, the Prancing Pony, the Forsaken Inn.
And the Forsaken Inn. That
sounds like an official name of a place.
I think, I suspect it's more just that's what people refer to it as because it's been abandoned.
Yeah.
Because it's presumably somewhat of a milestone. If you're going to make that journey, it's kind of like...
It is a milestone, right? I mean, that's Strider's point is I don't know if the road is ever measured in miles beyond the Forsaken Inn.
Right. That's just the last settlement.
It's the last marker. It's Zizek's Road on the 15 before you get to Nevada. It's the last thing, that anybody who's ever been on that Forsaken Road will know what I'm talking about. Arthur.
Yeah, it just goes to show how forward-thinking Tolkien was. It's clearly the place where the bad guys from the Wheel of Time hung out.
Oh, wow. The crossover nobody thought we needed. Thank you, Arthur. Good one. It's a fair question. I like that. Of course, for me, when you mention Forsaken Inn, my mind just goes to Lord of the Rings Online, where it's actually not forsaken. And, there are people there and you get to have their quests out of there and things like that. I do love Lord of the Rings Online, and I'll give that a shout out as my favorite adaptation of any of them. But James, who's up next?
Sam is up next.
Sam.
So I've always been confused about the union of elves and men. We know there's 3 big ones, but I still don't understand what's going on with Prince Imral.
Yes, that is a good one. Is it just that's your question and we get to...
If you could clear that up, I'd be... That's great.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to. I wasn't sure if you had like a specific one you wanted us to answer, or if you just want to kind of talk about broadly the idea of, wait a minute, what's going on?
If there is a union, why isn't it included with the other 3?
Why isn't that? Yeah. Why is that?
Have you got it handy, Alan, to bring up the exact wording? Yeah, it's worth checking that exact.
And we're talking about, that's in the letters, isn't it? Where Tolkien talks about the 3 unions?
No, it's in the appendices. There's a...
Oh, that's right.
He may also talk about it in the letters, but in the appendices there is the line about the 3. But I want to make sure we get exactly the right wording about what there were 3 of.
Yeah. All right. So the text that we're talking about here is in Appendix A1, actually Portion 1 under the Númenórean Kings. There were 3 unions of the Eldar and the Edain, Lúthien and Beren, Idril and Tuor, Arwen and Aragorn. By the last, the long-sundered branches of the half-elven were reunited and their line was restored.
So it's specifically Eldar and Edain.
Eldar and Edain. So that leaves out any men that are not Edain, and it leaves out any elves that are not Eldar. For instance, any Avari. So what do you think, James?
Because Legolas recognizes that he has elven blood.
Right. Recognize that Imrahil is elvish. Pretty easy because he has no beard. Because as we know, anybody with even a drop of elvish blood would have no facial hair. Aragorn, Denethor, Boromir, Faramir.
Right.
All right. So, the whole line of the princes of Dol Amroth is said to have had the elvish blood enter that line through the marriage of Imrazor, the Númenórean, and Mithrelas, the Sylvan elf. Now, Imrazor is definitely an Edain because he was known as Imrazor the Numenorian. He was a Gondorian man, definitely. So there's no doubt about that. Mithrelas was a Sylvan elf.
Yep.
So that means she was descended from the Nandor.
Yes.
Which were originally part of the Teleri.
Yes.
But that would still make her Eldar. She's not Avari.
Yeah.
Now, in fairness, they became a scattered folk, hardly distinguishable from the Avari.
Right.
This is one that I've always sort of just glossed over this, but like, yeah, whatever. I mean, we know what he means, but we don't. I mean, 3 unions, those were the 3 historically important unions of men and elves. But tell that to the princes of Dol Amroth, because Imrazor and Mithrelas is historically important to them. Arthur, you want to throw something in there for us?
Yeah, that's what I always thought, was that those were the 3 that the historians cared about and that the Noldor cared about because of their roles in First Age and Third Age, kind of like Elrond had a kid, and then there were the 2 other guys, but nobody talked about them. They talked about the other one. So I feel certain that there were other pairings, but they didn't make the history books.
Yeah, certainly an idea. Marie?
Okay, so as a Sylvan elf, I don't think they were accounted among the Calaquendi. That's the light of the trees.
Right. Well, right. They weren't elves of the light, but they were still Eldar.
Because they started, the big division is, there's 2 divisions, right? Which one saw the light, but there's also which one started on the journey. Right. And they definitely started on the journey.
Yeah, the Teleri started on the journey and then eventually branched off.
Either got scared by the Misty Mountains or liked the forests and rivers too much.
Yeah.
I always thought the Eldar was more the 3 main kindreds of the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri.
Well, and that's the thing. She's descended from the Teleri.
Yeah.
Sylvan are a subset of the Teleri.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge that we're dealing with here. I do have a letter that I'll look to in just a moment, but Jim, you've got something to add to this?
Well, don't forget that it was said by the hobbits that what the ancestor of the Tolks took a fairy wife.
A fairy wife. So now we've got a hobbit elf marriage as well. I'm going to chalk that one up to a hobbit myth. I'm going to go ahead and look at a letter here. This is a letter written in 1954. It is letter number 153. It's a draft to Peter Hastings, and he's talking about the idea of reincarnation and things. And he says that I suppose that actually the chief difficulties I've involved myself in are scientific and biological, which worry me just as much as the theological and metaphysical, though you do not seem to mind them so much. Elves and men are evidently, in biological terms, one race, or they could not breed and produce fertile offspring, even as a rare event. There are 2 cases only in my legends of such unions, and they emerge in the descendants of Earendil. Then there's a footnote to that. One would expect 3 cases, right? There were 3 unions of the Eldar. That's literally it. That doesn't even mention, it's like there's 3 in the text. Tolkien says there's 2, but nobody says there's 4. So I don't know if there's anything that we can point to other than just historically important. I mean, that's really what we're looking at here. There would have been others. Certainly there would have been between the Avari and men, either Edain or otherwise.
Right.
I can't imagine there being one with a non-Edain man and an Eldar woman. That I can't.
That's going too far.
It is. I can't imagine that an elf descended from one of those 3
right
would wed a man who wasn't a human, who was not part of the Edain. So, but certainly, non-Edain and Avari, along with Edain and Avari, could wed and have children. Arthur.
Do we know for a fact that Gonburdi Khan had a beard?
Scraggly little bits of hair. They didn't get a lot of facial hair. I don't think that means they had elvish blood.
Okay, there you go.
All right. I'm just going to leave that one right there. All right, James, and who else do we have here in the second round?
Last but not least, we have Neil again.
Neil, welcome back again.
So the Prince of Dol Amroth is of Numenorian descent, but are there any other areas in Gondor south of the White Mountains and west of the River Anduin ruled by those of Numenorian descent in the same way that the Normans ruled over the Anglo-Saxons in England after 1066? Or do they have rulers whose lineage is from those who remained in Middle-earth after the end of the First Age?
Interesting. So we're talking about all the other, like the fiefdoms that send their people there to Minas Tirith, for instance, the ones who are listed in that chapter.
And that's actually where the question came from, is all those various names. And we've just discussed that in Prince Imrahil. But actually, are they all from the original men, or were any of them... I say, was it a bit like when the Normans came over to England and sort of decided we're in charge?
That's a very good question, actually. I think if I go back to episode 268, where we looked at the arrival of many of those people, that is to say the soldiers, so not so much the refugees leaving out, but the arrival of the soldiers.
And their captains in particular.
And their captains. We get some names, and I think the names will help us. So let's see. I'm taking a look here. All right, so we've got Devorin, son of the Lord, and the men of the Ringlow Valley. Devorin, that's going to be a Sindarin name, isn't it?
Is that
Dervorin?
How's that spelt?
Dervorin.
That sounds more Sindarin than. Yeah, that doesn't sound Adonaic.
Yeah, that doesn't sound Adonaic. Same with. Then we got Duin here and Duilin and Derafin.
They all sound either Sindarin or even, Old English related.
Yeah, I was going to say Dunhir sounds possibly, but it's...
that could be Sindarin.
It's Duin here. Yeah, it's Riverlord, actually.
Yeah.
Duin, yeah. Like Anduin. Duin here, Duilin, Derafin.
River, yeah.
Then we get Golazgil, the lord leading the men from the Anfalas. We get an unnamed... Well, we get a group of people who don't even have a captain or a lord coming from Lamadon. We get 100 fishermen from the Ethir, again, not with a named leader. Hirluin the Fair from Pinath Gelin, so that's another Sindarin name. Imrahil, the Prince of Dol Amroth.
Which is an Adonaic name.
And then we get the other regions. We don't get any names of the people themselves, just the lands. So, interesting. We do get a lot of Sindarin names.
Yeah. Or Westron at best, and certainly not Adonaic.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any evidence of anyone else having Numenorian.
Not in leadership positions. I mean, I do see some of these, like the physical descriptions of some of these people, like the Grim Hillman, for instance. The name Lamadon, which the Unfinished Index actually says is another pre-Numenorian name. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting one. So that suggests that maybe these are descended from peoples who were originally in the land before Gondor was established.
Right. So not Edain, presumably. Yeah.
That whole idea of a pre-Numenorian name, folks, we see that a little less with the people, certainly, but we see it in the names of some of the Beacon Hills. I think 2 or 3 of them at least are said to be pre-Numenorian names. And so when you have a pre-Numenorian name, the suggestion here is that perhaps this is, an older culture. But even the physical description, they don't sound like the same kind of tall, gray-eyed, dark-haired men of Dol Amroth. There's definitely a difference in the way they appear. Interesting. Yeah, I feel like by this point, of course, there would have been a lot of intermarriage and things like that. But I do suspect that at least for those men, they're arriving without a leader, descended from Gondor,
from Numenor.
Gondor from Numenor.
Right. Yeah.
From Numenor via
particularly
Gondor.
Numenor.
But yes, particularly Numenor. You're right. Yep. That's a very good point. Excellent. Well, that's a really good question. Marie, you said you wanted to add something to that?
Didn't Elendil and the faithful, the Lords of Andunier, start sending people, like the faithful, to Middle-earth to help them escape? I thought that was something I read, but maybe I'm wrong. But I feel like there would have been migration.
The faithful were allowed to leave as long as they didn't come back.
Right. So
I know that was true.
So maybe some of them settled in that southern area.
Well, I think the idea of Dol Amroth wasn't Dol Amroth established prior to the fall.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So we know that their heritage traces all the way back in that regard to Numenor pre-fall. The line of Dol Amroth, that is. Hard question. Good one, though, Neil. Yeah. I also like the way you compared that, though, to the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons, because you knew that would get to me. Norman invasion. James, I don't think we have anybody officially in queue, but there are a few more who haven't asked, and I think we do have one more question, or at least time for one more question. Chris.
Might have been asked on a Questions After Nightfall before, but I think it's maybe a good time to refresh it. Alan, you've had so many incredible co-hosts, guests over the years. Mm-hmm. Who's one that you just haven't been able to nail down? Like, who's somebody you're really hoping that you can have come on the show?
As a guest or as a co-host?
Can you give me one of each?
Okay. As a guest, we've had some incredible folks on the show. I mean, we've had Tom Shippey and Verlin Flieger on, and I don't know that there's anybody who's going to be able to top them. That is to say, there's nobody alive who would be able to top them. There was a time where we dreamt of one day having Christopher Tolkien on. It would never have happened. Okay. I don't think that would ever have happened in a million years, but that was always like, wouldn't that be nice? Right. That was always our like, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But as far as a guest now, honestly, I'd actually like to spend some time diving into the world of the adaptations. And I would love to have Sir Peter Jackson on the show to talk about, around the time of the 25th anniversary of the films, to talk about his contribution to the Tolkien fandom in creating an adaptation that, absolutely blew the doors open on the fandom. I think that would be wonderful. As for a guest co-host, I'm going to say one of our guests who I have absolutely enjoyed having multiple times. I would love to have like a 3 or 4 episode run with Dr. Brett Devereaux.
I was going to say.
He's just so good, so entertaining, so much fun, and knows his stuff inside and out. That if he ever wanted to come on for a run through, again, it would have to be a run through some set of episodes that are very battle heavy. It would absolutely thrill my heart to have him on. Those would be names that come to my mind. Jim, looks like we've got time for one more.
Oh, this is very quick. Just when I was listening to the most recent episode of Prancing Pony podcast, you talked about how when Celebrimbor was distributing the rings to the dwarves, how it went out to the leaders, it immediately put me into mind of a quote saying, "Listen, strange elf lords lying in a region distributing rings is no basis for a system of government."
And indeed, it is not. And of course, I love that.
And
I love that.
Probably a bad way to choose your leaders. So.
I'm wondering now if the dwarves of Morrow were really just an anarcho-syndicalist commune, sort of taking it turns to be an executive of the week. Durin, I am your king.
Durin of the
week. Why'd you become king?
I didn't vote for you.
Oh, man, that's good stuff. I love that. On that note, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. But be sure to join James and me again next week when we get back to the appendices as we spend an entire episode figuring out what our wall calendar will look like in the Shire. So jazzed for the calendar episode.
Exactly. It's going to be fascinating, I promise.
It really will. I wasn't being sarcastic. Just in case you're thinking I'm actually over top.
Well, I know you're not being sarcastic, but I'm just hoping that people listening are sort of thinking. I'm reassuring them that it
really will be good, folks. If you were with us in season 1 and you remember the sort of dread that Sean and I approached chapter 14 of the Silmarillion with, the map chapter, how are we going to turn that into an audio episode of a podcast? That turned out to be one of my favorite episodes that season. It was absolutely a
fantastic
blast.
Chapter. It's a fantastic chapter.
This is the same thing. We're taking something that's visual and we're going to turn it into a podcast, and hopefully you all enjoy that. So come back next week for sure.
Absolutely. Alan and I want to thank the members of Team PPP, editor Jordan Rennells, Barliman Becca Davis, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, graphic artist Megan Collins, and website guru Phil Dean.
And please take a minute to check out the prancingponypodcast.com. That's where you'll find show notes, outtakes, Prancing Pony Ponderings, and our online storefront where you can get PPP merch, including the all-new episode art from Megan.
You'll also want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony Podcast is, after all, a podcast about the books. So if you're interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, you'll find a link for it in our library. We do get a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase, and we thank you for that.
Indeed we do. We also want to thank our patrons at the Círdan's contribution tier. I'll start with DeMay in Alaska, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Zaksu in Illinois, Sarah in New Jersey, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, Keith in Alabama, Erica in Texas, and Vivian in California.
There's also James in Massachusetts, Anne in Kentucky, Sean in New Jersey, Mason in California, Maureen from Massachusetts, Olivia in London, Robert in Arizona, Nick in Wisconsin, Lewis in South Carolina, Thomas in Germany, Craig in California, Bailey in Texas, Kevin in Massachusetts, Julie in Washington, Bruce in California, Joe in Maryland, Nathan in Arizona, and Kevin in Pennsylvania. Thank you all so very much for your support.
Indeed, thank you very much.
Now make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. Subscribe now through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your favourite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your really difficult questions to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com.
And if you want your voice literally heard, well, just send us audio of your question. Visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us. Please be sure to still email the question to Barliman though.
Even though Barliman's been a lot more reliable lately, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able. As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
may you rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill.